Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're going to get started, and just a note that this webinar is being recorded. So like always, I have a few housekeeping tasks and reminders to go over first. First, please keep your microphone on mute until the Q&A portions of the webinar. If you do have any questions throughout the webinar, you can type them in the chat and we will answer them. To find the chat feature in your Zoom window, look for the speaking bubble icon or the chat bubble. The chat defaults to all webinar participants in the to field. So to send a direct message to one participant, click the down arrow after everyone and select the specific participant. Next, if you need or want captions, you can enable these by finding the CC or Show Captions button at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you do not see the CC button, look for the More button with the 3 dots. Click on that to toggle the captions on or off. So again, welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar, Making and Selling Juice in Minnesota. This webinar is part of the Food Safety Foundation series. And in this series, we've covered a variety of topics, starting with reviewing the pathogens that can cause foodborne illness, how your actions can impact food safety, what's included in a thorough sanitation routine, and a variety of food preservation methods. If you were unable to join any of these past webinars, Rick is going to share a link in the chat to our YouTube channel playlist where all of these are recorded. Additionally, we are going to be sharing quite a few links throughout the webinar today. So you can save these links when they pop up. Otherwise, they will all be included in a follow-up email sent out early next week with a recording of this webinar. So I'm Amy Johnston, and I'm one of today's speakers. I'm a regional extension educator at the University of Minnesota Extension on our food systems team, working in the area of food safety. Presenting with me today, we have Carrie Plood from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture and Annalisa Huddleberg, who is also a regional extension educator on our food systems team, working in the area of food safety as well. And then with us today is Rick Meyer, who is here to assist with any technical difficulties. He'll also be sharing the links throughout the chat or throughout the webinar in the chat. You can direct message Rick in Zoom if you are experiencing any problems. So let's get started. So today's webinar, it will be an introduction to the safety requirements and pathways for selling juice in Minnesota. Carrie is going to review key definitions that are important to understand as you begin to plan your business. I'll highlight some pathogens of concern and the role of pasteurization in making juice safe. Then Carrie will provide an overview of 4 pathways for selling juice in Minnesota. We'll define HACCP and provide some resources for you to review after the webinar. And then we'll wrap up with food safety best practices. Annalisa is going to talk about on-farm food safety best practices that you can take. And then I'll just touch on a few handling practices during production and sale. So again, feel free to type your questions in the chat and we'll try to answer them throughout the webinar. If not, we'll get to them at the end. So by the end of this webinar, we hope that you will know the different food business pathways for making and selling juice, understand the importance of food safety strategies and practices to make your juice safe, and know how and where to access resources to help you plan your juice business. So with that, I will turn it over to Carrie, who's going to get us started with some definitions.
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everyone. Let's start by talking about and defining juice. So juice is defined as the aqueous liquid expressed or extracted from one or more fruits or vegetables, the purees of edible portions of one or more fruits or vegetables, and any concentrates of those fruits or vegetables. So there's a couple different areas of juice. So I'll go over those. 100% juice or fruit juice or vegetable juice. Those are your common juices, your apple juice, your cider, tomato juice, orange juice, those types of things. Also includes juice blends. So if you have a grape juice blended with some other type of apple juice or some sort, that would also fall under 100% juice. One that's not as commonly known as a popsicle. A popsicle also falls under 100% juice because it is all juice, unless there's sugar added or whatnot. But frozen is basically frozen juice on a stick. One other thing to note is that sometimes we forget that raw juice still falls under the definition of juice. So when we define that and talk about different requirements of juice, raw juice is 100% juice. Another type of product that we have is what is known as a juice beverage or a juice drink. And those are a little bit different because they just have a fresh juice ingredient, but they might also have other added ingredients. So the most common type of product we see is lemonade. So you have your fresh lemon juice, and then you add other things such as sugar and water. Other examples would be fruit punch, Bloody Mary mix, where you have a fresh tomato juice, so cocktail mixes, and even energy drinks. From time to time, we come across products where somebody is wanting to make an energy drink, and they have, say, like a fresh ginger juice in there. A fruit or vegetable puree. The most common type of product would be like orange pulp and orange juice. Sometimes you'll have fruit purees used in, say, like a smoothie. Coconut water or milk would also fall under this definition. That's pressed from the pulp of the coconut. And then the last example of juice would be a concentrate. So basically, we've extracted the water from the juice and we still have 100% juice. Right, Amy, I will turn it back over to you.
Okay. So the fruits and vegetables used to make juice can become contaminated at any point during the flow of food. So animal feces can contaminate a water source, especially if using a surface water or if water floods into holding ponds, and then that water is used to irrigate crops. If different kind of fertilizers are used or applied at the wrong time, using bruised or damaged produce, as those points of injury are more susceptible to pathogens, and then human transmission from inadequate hand washing or working while sick, and then inadequate sanitation routine of juice making or processing equipment. So we need to be aware of these throughout the entire flow of making juice. Pathogens can be present in both acidic, those juices that have a pH of 4.6 or less, so a lot of fruit juices, and then also low acid juices, so those juices that have a pH greater than 4.6. So some of our vegetable juices, and they can be present in raw juices as well. So on the screen are a handful of pathogens of concern to consider when making juice. And again, these pathogens can contaminate the produce used for juice itself at various points throughout the flow of food. So in the January webinar of this series, we spent time reviewing E. coli, Listeria monocytogenes, Salmonella, hepatitis A virus, and norovirus. So I'm only going to mention a few key points about these pathogens. So E. coli and salmonella are naturally present in the GI systems or the guts of animals and poultry. So contamination can occur if the feces contaminate a water source on the farm. If farm workers don't have or don't use good hand hygiene or hand washing, um, or if clothes become contaminated going between working with animals to then handling produce, or if animals are permitted to enter in some of that produce processing space. Listeria monocytogenes, again, is naturally present in the soil and in our environment. So it can contaminate produce as well as just the processing equipment. It can grow in cold environments and in packaging without or with little oxygen. So if produce is contaminated, it's used to make juice and it's bottled and stored in a refrigerator until it's consumed without applying a heat treatment, that pathogen could grow easily. Hepatitis A virus and norovirus are easily spread by infected food handlers. So this could be from on the farm to those sorting the produce to those actually making the juice and then also packaging the juice. So it's important to have strict employee illness policies and procedures. Clostridium botulinum is another pathogen that's naturally present in the soil and our environment. The toxin production can be a concern in low acid juices, so those vegetable juices, if not processed correctly. The low acid juices must be handled according to practices that will cover to minimize that risk. Then the Cryptosporidium parvum parasite that has been, it's a parasite that's been associated with foodborne illness in raw apple juice. There's been foodborne outbreaks from raw apple cider that's been made from dropped apples or those fallen apples that were then pressed and made into cider. And fortunately, though, this parasite can be destroyed with sufficient pasteurization, which we'll talk about later today. Then the other point of concern is pathogen, and that is a mycotoxin that's produced by certain molds. So it's commonly found in apples or on apples, but it's also been detected in other fruits like pears, bananas, peaches, pineapple, blueberries, apricots, cherries, and grapes. So very high levels of this mycotoxin are in rotting or moldy apples, for example. So the fallen fruit that could have been bruised when hitting the ground or have insect or bird damage, they're also more susceptible to that pathogen production because mold is going to be able to enter that fruit more easily. Storing fruit like apples properly within a certain time frame of harvest is important for minimizing the risk of molds and then that toxin production. Only selecting quality fruit to make the juice is also important because pathogen is not inactivated by a heat treatment or pasteurization. And it's because that the sucrose or a form of sugar keeps that mycotoxin stable. So it's not inactivated by that heat. If one contaminated apple with a sufficient amount of pathogen is used with 200 quality apples, that's enough to still raise that level of toxin to an unsafe level in that batch of juice. And the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has set a limit of how much pathogen could be present in apple juice to not cause a problem. And anything above that would be considered adulterated and cannot be sold. So pasteurization inactivates pathogens that we reviewed on the previous slide, except for that pathogen toxin. So pasteurization is the heating of a food, and in this case, juice, to a specific temperature for a specific amount of time in order to inactivate pathogens that can cause foodborne illness. And then that product, that food, is rapidly cooled. For juice, pasteurization is used to achieve a 5-log reduction in pathogens potentially present in that juice. So what a 5-log reduction means is that 99.999% of pathogens present are inactivated. The temperature and time for pasteurization is not a one-size-fits-all for all types of juice. The pasteurization process is influenced by the acidity of the juice. So the pH impacts the viability or the ability of pathogens to grow or survive. So juices with a pH of 4.0 or less may need less time at a higher temperature to achieve that required reduction in pathogens. And we'll look at an example on the next slide. So juices within a higher pH or a low acidity will need pasteurization at a higher time or at a higher temperature and potentially for a longer time. Pasteurization is also influenced by the type of produce. So vegetable juices, they have that higher pH than fruit juices. There's specific guidelines for citrus juices in regards to salmonella being a main pathogen of concern for citrus juices. And then there's considerations for apple juice because of the Cryptosporidium parvum parasite and E. coli. And then lastly, how the final juice product will be stored before consuming also impacts the pasteurization process. So batch pasteurization and high temperature short time pasteurization are for juices that are still going to need temperature control or that refrigeration to maintain safety and quality. Ultra high temperature pasteurization is used then with aseptic packaging to produce that shelf stable product. So this is an example of apple juice. So our pathogens of concern with apple juice would be that Cryptosporidium parvum and then E. coli. So there's research that for apple juice with a pH of 4.6 or less, the pasteurization temperature and time, this is kind of the scale that can be used. And again, this might be different than for an apple juice that has a pH of greater than 4.0. Another example is carrot juice. So carrot juice is that low acid or that high pH juice. So refrigerated carrot juice is going to require a processing step to minimize the risk of the Clostridium botulinum toxin production. And it's going to need labeling that's going to say keep refrigerated. For shelf-stable juice, there are low acid food processing requirements that must be followed, and we'll get to those later in the webinar. So Carrie had mentioned raw juice, and raw juice is 100% 100% juice. And so if raw juice is sold, there is the FDA warning that is required to be on that label or at your stand for selling. And the warning is this product has not been pasteurized and therefore may contain harmful bacteria that can cause serious illness in children, the elderly, and persons with weakened immune systems. So this is required for any type of juice or that juice, the variety of juices that Carrie reviewed if they have not been pasteurized, and it's because of Those pathogens of concern that we just reviewed could be present in that juice. So I will turn it now back over to Carrie as we jump into our pathways for selling juice.
Yes. Hi again. So, what I want to talk to you guys about next is, and actually the reason I was asked to be on this webinar is just to discuss the options for legally selling food in the state of Minnesota in order to sell juice products that you may already be making or thinking about making. So, let's go ahead and get started with the first one, which is wholesale sales. So I'm going to talk to you about different types of sales and then what is required with those types of sales. So wholesale is defined as sales to any person or businesses other than the end consumer. So it means that whoever you're turning that juice over to is going to do something with it. They're either going to resell it, such as like a grocery store or a school or a food distributor, or they're going to use it to process. Like you may sell it to a restaurant who may then use it in some type of product, or you might sell it to a processor to make a food or some different type of product out of it. So it just means that you're selling it to other than somebody else who is going to actually consume it. So the requirements for selling wholesale is that you have to complete training in the principles of Juice HACCP and you have to meet the entire Juice HACCP regulation. So pretty much what everybody knows the Juice HACCP regulation for is what Amy just went over, is the requirement to pasteurize, heat treat, or UV treatment is also included. That's actually not a heat treatment, but it is considered a pasteurizing treatment of the juice before you sell it. And the other big thing with wholesale to know is that raw juice cannot be sold at wholesale. The only way that you can sell raw juice is directly to the consumer. Some other requirements include obtaining a wholesale food handler manufacturer license through our agency, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And you have to make the juice in an approved processing space, so not your home. So an approved space includes things such as the facility, the layout of the facility, the floors, walls, ceilings of the facility, the type of equipment you're using. It also includes water and sewer, as well as zoning. So there's quite a few things that need to be covered and meet the requirements of before you can become licensed in a facility. You also need to successfully pass food inspections and continue to apply with the regulations once you have received that license. Now, I believe after each slide here, I think Rick is going to drop in the chat a direct link to our Minnesota Department of Agriculture food page with specific information on each one of these types of license or ways to sell food that we'll be discussing. All right, the next one is retail. So pretty self-explanatory. It's just sales directly to the end consumer. So whoever you're going to give that juice to is going to drink it. They're not gonna do anything else with it as far as reselling it or food or processing. So the requirements for retail sales are that you have to meet the requirements of the Minnesota Food Code. There's lots of different requirements in the Minnesota Food Code, but as it applies to juice, those specific requirements are making sure that you have a retail HACCP plan and a variance in place. And if you are selling raw juice, it does have to have that warning statement that Amy just showed on a few slides prior. One big difference between wholesale and retail is that when we talk about having an approved processing space, with wholesale, you work directly with your inspector to ensure that the space is approved. With retail, you have to actually submit a plan review, and that plan review is a specific document that you complete. It does come with a fee, and you submit that ahead of time. And then you work with a compliance officer to approve your space prior to actually working with your inspector and getting a license. So you do have to obtain a retail food handler's license in order to sell juice at retail. A couple other things. So as far as Juice HACCP goes, it's for retail, it's a little different than wholesale, but the kind of the same thing where it is required to heat your juice, treat your juice in some form or fashion so that you receive that 5 log reduction. It also does require you to submit a variance to the retail food program in order to obtain that license, just saying that this is how I'm going to treat my juice. This is the science-based research on where I received that information from, that this is a proper treatment to get me to a 5 log reduction. Usually you have to work with some type of process authority or food expert to obtain that processing information. You can't just generally pick a number at a time. You got to have some kind of scientific information backing that up. Again, if you're not going to be heat treating your juice, if you're going to do raw juice, then that part does not apply to you. Couple other things that I just forgot to mention from above. So retail sales can occur in a variety of different places, but not from your home. So you could have a restaurant, a juice bar, you could have a food stand or a mobile unit, but it does not allow sales. You could sell directly from your production space, but you cannot sell from your home, a retail sale from your home. All right, I think that is all the information for this one. And again, the link is in the chat. Okay. All right, moving on. So I just talked to you about 2 different types of sales, wholesale or retail. And both of those require you to get a license. To sell food in the state of Minnesota, you do have to have a license to do so. That is required through our Minnesota state statutes. Within our Minnesota state statutes, there are a couple of exemptions that allow you to produce food without obtaining that license. So I'm going to say that again. That will allow you to produce food without obtaining a license. It does not exempt you from any other food safety requirements. All it says is you don't have to pay that license fee in order to sell food. So let's cover, I have 2 areas I want to cover with that. The first one is cottage foods, which I'm imagining many of you are already familiar with. So cottage foods allows individuals to make products in their home, their residential kitchen, which you will have to obtain a license. That is not something that is allowable. The cottage food sales, like I said, are exempt from the Minnesota food licensing requirements. And you have to, this allows you to produce home canned or home processed foods in Minnesota, but they do have to be a non-potentially hazardous food. So some of the cottage food rules that they kind of have their own rules that come with this exemption. And some of those are that you must complete the required training. There's 2 different types of trainings based on your amount of sales that you're going to be under. You need to register with the MDA. They have to know where you're at. And then you have to sell directly to the end consumer. So just like retail, through farmers markets, community events, or from the home, which is unlike the one we just previously talked about. You can't sell from home with a license, but the cottage food exemption does allow you to do that. You do have to follow safe food handling practices when preparing, packing, and selling cottage foods. Some of those include making sure that, you're, like Amy talked about, hand washing, clean spaces, making sure that we're not producing food in a manner that can contaminate it with, norovirus or hepatitis A, just, from handling. Few other things with cottage food rules. So you can sell from your home. You are not allowed to ship foods. So you can't use, UPS or FedEx to ship foods to others. They cannot be sold to other businesses or wholesaled, and they have to be sold by the cottage food producer. So you can't have other places selling your products for you, say like a grocery store or a coffee shop. And then there is an annual food sales cap on cottage foods, and that is $78,000 annually. So fruits and vegetable juice that are sold must be done so. They have to be home canned or home processed, and they have to be shelf stable. So just kind of what Amy was talking about before, it has to have a pH of less than 4.6, and that's either going to be naturally or you're going to help that out by making it an acidic food. for things such as a vegetable juice. In order for it to be shelf stable, you're going to have to treat it with high heat. And then, like Amy said, aseptically pack it. This is not something we see commonly done outside of, large manufacturers, where you might find those juices on the shelf in the grocery stores that are shelf stable. We don't see a lot of that happening in cottage food right now, but it can be. And that is the only way that juice can be sold. It cannot be sold in a fresh form, and it cannot be sold raw. Because in fresh form, it is a potentially hazardous food, as is raw juice. One thing to note with cottage foods is, again, you are exempt from licensing as a cottage food producer, but that does not mean you are exempt from inspection. So we do and have conducted inspections of cottage food producers, most commonly because there has been an incident or concern or complaint related to a cottage food producer. And with that, I think we can go ahead and drop the link in the chat for the cottage foods right there. And the last one I want to talk about is another exemption. So under our Minnesota state statutes, same as the previous cottage foods, there is an exclusion for products of the farm or garden. So what this means is a person that is selling the product of the farm or garden that they own, that they run. It could be land rented by you, but the key is it's got to be your product. So you farm it, you from start to finish, it's a product that you produce. Again, this is just another way for farmers to sell their products without a license. So again, even though you don't have to have a food, you don't have to require or obtain a license, again, you still have to produce a safe food product and follow good manufacturing practices. Some of the requirements for product of the farm is that it has to be just that, a product of the farm. You cannot have any added ingredients that were not grown or weren't product of the farm. So if you're adding any salt or sugar or preservatives, that takes away this exemption. Juice still has to be safe, and it still has to be correctly labeled. You have to make sure you're following all of the safe food handling practices when preparing and selling products. So as was talked about a little bit earlier, I want to make sure that we have, quality produce, that we're washing our produce to eliminate a lot of those pathogens from the beginning, that we're heat treating it, pasteurizing it, having good sanitation practices in wherever we're producing this product. I want to make sure we have temperature control, that we're using, safe temperatures to control the growth of pathogens. Look at the shelf life and consider the shelf life of your product, and make sure we have appropriate packaging that keeps that food safe and protects it from contamination during sales. Again, product of the farm or garden is exempt from licensing, and it doesn't have any specific exclusions on how you can sell this. So with the cottage foods, you're only allowed to sell it at retail, where with product of the farm, it does not exclude you from selling that at wholesale. So again, you could potentially sell this to other businesses or through a restaurant or through a grocery store. But one thing to note is that it doesn't exclude you from the Juice HACCP regulation, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this presentation. So anybody that wants to wholesale juice, whether they have a license or not, does have to meet the requirements of the Juice HACCP regulation. Right. Again, if you're selling direct to consumers, you need to have that warning statement on the juice. Again, you're exempt from licensing, but not from inspections. So a lot of times concerns, incidents, complaints can result in an inspection. There's a lot of times that we actually do inspections of unlicensed facilities just based on, like I was saying, complaints or just different things that come up. We do have the authority to go out and do those inspections, and we do for those unlicensed facilities. I did see something pop up in the chat. So is this, Amy, this question, somebody asked, Judith asked, what is the best and most effective way to wash fruits and vegetables to minimize contamination? Is that something one of you guys wants to talk to? Otherwise, I can, put my 2 cents in there, but
Yeah, I'd say let's hold that question till the end, because I think, depending on where you're asking, either on the farm or in the kitchen, that might get covered here later in the webinar. But so we'll circle back to that at the end.
okay, great. Thanks for that. So to recap, there's 2 routes of selling your juice in the state of Minnesota, and that's either wholesale or retail, and you are required to have a license to do that. There are 2 specific licensing exclusions that I went over: the cottage foods, which allow you to sell non-potentially hazardous foods from your home, from a farmer's market, community event at retail only, or the product of the farm, which allows you to sell either wholesale or retail without having to have that obtain that license. And I guess one thing I think I didn't cover clearly is that when you are required to have a license, you have to have an approved facility, which you cannot produce in your home. Under these licensing exclusions, one of the things that kind of goes away is having that approved processing location. So there's nothing that says that you cannot produce product of the farm or garden from your home. Again, just because you aren't required to have a license doesn't mean that you're exempt from food safety regulations or inspections or enforcement. If there are issues with products you're producing and selling, especially if it's unsafe or you've made somebody sick. Let me see here. Okay, so Judith just added a little bit, another note about in the kitchen is what she's referring to. So that might be a good one for you guys to answer later.
Yeah,
okay.
Great. Yeah, we'll circle back to that later if it's not answered in the next couple slides. So great, thank you, Carrie. So just a few points about HACCP before I turn it over to Annalisa. So we've used the word HACCP now a few times. I know we've talked about it before, but excuse me. So HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. And that is a system for identifying and minimizing the risk of hazards, those physical, chemical, or biological hazards that may occur during processing of the food product. A HACCP plan is that written plan that details your approach and food safety controls. So things like critical limits. What is that limit for safety? Monitoring practices. How are you going to monitor those critical limits to ensure that your food is safe? Record keeping, verification steps, and then any corrective actions if there's a deviation from that. It's important to note for those of you that are in that licensed route, a HACCP plan is not one and the same as your business's food safety plan. Your business's food safety plan is going to include everything from, your procurement of your food, employee health and illness policies, procedures, your general sanitation procedures, all of those day-to-day things. Those are in your food safety plan. A HACCP plan is specific to one specific processing method, and your HACCP plan will then, complement your food safety plan, but they're not one and the same. So a HACCP plan, or the HACCP system, the approach has 12 steps. And it involves making sure you have a team, understanding your product, who's going to consume your product, what's the flow your food is going to take throughout that processing, those food safety controls, what are you looking for, how are you going to monitor that? And what records are you going to keep, and how are you going to verify that? So the good news is we have some resources that I'll share in the next couple slides that will help get you started with these steps specific to juice. You'll also likely need to talk to a process authority, which Carrie alluded to, and then looking at research to figure out, okay, what do I need to do for pasteurization? So Juice HACCP has its own specific HACCP, and it's part of the Code of Federal Regulations, 21 CFR Part 120. And Rick's going to share that link in the chat. And again, they'll be in the follow-up email. But it's specific to the processing of fruit or vegetable juice. There's specific principles in this that will help guide your plan and help you know what you should be looking for. There's a variety of principles of Juice HACCP training courses available online, either as a self-paced or in-person classes, if you search for those. And again, this is required for any person or that business that's selling juice or juice ingredients at wholesale. And then Rick is also going to share a guidance document from the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, that really complements the Code of Federal Regulations quite nicely with getting into your HACCP plan specifically for juice. And now here's the onslaught of links. Again, we will email these out with the recording. So in addition to that Code of Federal Regulations, that CFR on juice, these are additional CFR that provide the practices and standards to food manufacturing and processing. So these are really essential to developing what's called your prerequisite program. So those are all those things in that food safety plan, your general food safety plan. And those are needed as a foundation for your HACCP system. These prerequisite programs or these systems are going to include your facility and plant design, general maintenance of facilities and equipment, your cleaning and sanitizing procedures, training for employees, proper storage, chemicals, pest control, and quality assurance. So again, we will share these in the chat, but then also in a follow-up email. An additional link that you'll receive is a food safety plan builder tool from the FDA. And this is a great tool to help food manufacturers develop that food safety plan before you get going into your HACCP plan. I think for the sake of time, we'll just keep going on, and I will turn it over to Annalisa.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me, Amy, and hi, everybody. My name is Annalisa, and I'm an extension educator in food safety. I work with fruit and vegetable farmers on food safety, so not on the manufacturing side, but on the growing side. So you can move to the next slide. So gaps are the kind of the concepts that we use for food safety on the farm. So these might apply in this situation to the fruits and vegetables that you harvest that you might put into the juices that you're using to manufacture juices. Or if you're buying fruits and vegetables from others, you might ask for verification that someone is using these good agricultural practices. So these are things we do to minimize the risk of contamination. We're not ever eliminating risk, but we're really just reducing it. Next slide. So food safety on the farm is important. We talked about rinsing step, the kind of washing step for fruits and vegetables. It will reduce the number of germs, that bacteria or viruses that might be on there, but it won't eliminate them. So because that's leaf stomata, for example, if you had some fresh lettuce, the leaves breathe. They have pores and bacteria. These are E. coli, for example, are so small that they can actually get in there. And then also think of like a bumpy rind out of melon. The germs are pretty sticky and they create a biofilm, and they can be on there and be difficult to wash off. So if it was, especially if this product was going to be consumed raw and there wasn't a kill step, this good handling is extremely important. And this is really important for older folks too, babies or toddlers or those who might be immune compromised. A few cells, such as less than 10 of toxigenic E. coli, can make someone pretty sick. So our goal is to just kind of keep the poop off the food, so to speak, from the beginning. Next slide. So those are the things we're talking about. Amy already touched on these, but just the bacteria that come from animals and human feces, viruses, and these come from sick workers and handlers. And then parasites can come from dirty water, also from soil amendments, and those can also make our consumers sick. Next slide. So real quick, I'm just going to talk over a couple of things here. Next slide. Make sure that your workers are healthy. So we're going to wash our hands just like in the kitchen on the farm. We're going to do it before we harvest or touch that fresh produce after using the bathroom and those other times. If you've got any livestock on the farm, it becomes really important to wash your hands and change your clothes in between any animal chores and the vegetable chores. And not working when you're sick, of course. Really training your workers or volunteers, even if your grandma stops by to help harvest the apples for your juices, making sure grandma's aware of your policies as well. Next slide. Those are some just hand washing, does not need to be fancy. On the farm, it can look like this. You can see it's a little bit more rustic than in a kitchen, but that's fine. It's got flowing water, a place to catch the water, garbage can, soap, and single-use towels, and you're good to go. Hand sanitizer is not a replacement for washing, of course. Next slide. So have a place to go to the bathroom. Tell your workers where to use the restroom. Make sure there's hand washing there. Next slide. And animals, moving on to animals, next slide. Of course, they are everywhere, but animal poop can contain pathogens. So if you've got animals around your farm, as most of us do, just putting up fencing or using deterrents as possible to try to keep those away. If you have livestock, don't let them in the produce growing areas. If you have pets, do your best to really train them to stay out of that produce growing area. I know that can be difficult, and it's not it might not be 100%, but do your best to keep your animals, your dogs, your cats out of the fresh produce growing area, and then not harvesting anything with visible contamination. Next slide. So there's tomato with visible contamination. We would not harvest that and say that we could wash it off, because we won't fully wash that off. And if there was salmonella in that bird poop, it might not be fully removed. So best practice is to just not harvest that for your juice or for sale. If you want to consume that yourself, go for it, but you would use a different standard for when you're serving it to others. Chewed chard at the bottom, too close to potentially where a deer or bunny was. Strawberries with poop near it, it's just too close to the poop, so don't harvest it. Next slide. So when you're harvesting, make sure to use the cleaned and sanitized totes and tools. So just like in the kitchen, we're washing our totes with detergent like Dawn, water, rinsing, and then sanitized with a sanitizing solution. This might be as simple as bleach that's intended for a food contact surface, or a peroxyacetic acid like Tsunami or Sanidate product as well, spraying that and air drying. You can go to the next slide. So we're keeping our harvest containers off the ground. You see on the left, those are up off the ground. And that's so we're not contaminating anything, especially with a perforated bottom. We don't want that to touch the soil. And then also it just keeps our totes clean, so less cleaning. So you can see they're scrubbing a tank there on the right. And so they would scrub it and they would rinse it, and then they would spray it with the sanitizer and let it air dry. That might be the tank that they're going to wash their vegetables in later. Next slide. So this is the steps for those cleaning and sanitizing, pretty straightforward, but just making sure that we're regularly doing this. This knocks back those biofilms so that we don't have the slime and things build up that can protect the pathogens that might be present. Next slide. So washing and storing produce. So using clean water. So this is water that if you've got a well, a best practice is to test that water annually for the presence of generic E. coli, which would indicate fecal contamination. Our wells should have no detectable generic E. coli. So that's drinking water. If you're in the city, you don't need to test the water. and cooling the produce quickly. So moving it into the shade, harvesting it early will keep it fresh, move it to the shade. If you're rinsing in a tank like we just saw that was being washed out, change that water frequently. So as soon as you start to see turbidity build up, especially if you're washing roots, for example, just change it frequently. And then a sanitizer is often used. So in the kitchen, there might be a different set of sanitizers. There's some that are approved that are often used on farms. And really that prevents cross-contamination. So if you've got one, let's say, bit of lettuce going in and it accidentally had some bird poop in it that you missed, it would be a lot less likely it might have a 5-log reduction, so that 99.999% of the microorganisms in that water have been inactivated, so that the water wouldn't serve as a cross-contamination vector to get from lettuce A to lettuce B. So that's a really great practice to use on farm. And if anyone has questions about those, I can help you find those sanitizers. Next slide. So we've got lettuce being unwashed on the right there. They're using a Tsunami or a Sanidate 5 is another option. It also really makes it last longer. It's just a great idea to use. Or a spray table for beets. So instead of a great way to wash the question about washing vegetables, a great way to wash vegetables and a really safe way is that single pass water. So you're using a shower instead of a bath whenever possible, because that water is single pass, it's going to go straight down. On the right, we can't spray off greens because they would disintegrate. So we're just agitating them very gently. But when possible, that spray table is a great option. And next slide. Internalization is just something that can happen. I just added this in because if we're thinking about washing our vegetables, another consideration is when we've got a really warm fruit like cantaloupe in really cold water and you've got any damage, especially. Another reason not to bring in damaged or fallen product, because a tiny bruise or the stem end, even the water can get sucked in because the fruit itself is a lot warmer than the water, and that causes a vacuum action and will actually get sucked into the intercellular structure of the produce where you will not be able to wash it off. So whatever's in that water might go into your fruit. And especially if you're crisping, think of your crisping greens. You're going out of your way to get them to imbibe that water. So that water should be clean. Next slide. That's a picture of internalization. And they put some dye in the water and it got sucked into that cantaloupe. So that's what it looks like. And you can actually do this. I've done it multiple times and it happens. It also happens in apples and other vegetables. So just keep that water clean if you're washing on farm or in your own sink. And next slide. And that's it. This was a very brief overview of just a few concepts. We offer much longer trainings. Our farmer trainers co-train with me. So if you are somebody who is producing fruits and vegetables in addition to juice, we'd be happy to have you at a training. Oh, excuse me. You can develop a farm food safety plan. We've got templates to do that we can send out in the post-course email. You can get a gap audit if you so desire. This is not a requirement, but this is a voluntary verification of your on-farm food safety practices that you pay for. And you would get this if you needed to sell to a wholesale buyer like a Russ Davis or a Lunds & Byerly's or a Cub, Cisco. They're going to ask for that audit. I can help you get that. And our website is listed there. So please read about more cleaning and sanitizing tips and tools and on that website. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Some, really great best practices to work into your operation. Okay, so just a few key points, just kind of wrapping up things that have been discussed. So that food safety dream production. So use those good manufacturing practices, those safe food handling practices to guide your day-to-day operations. So again, use that quality produce, not bruised or damaged or fallen. Purchase from those approved sources. Ask about those on-farm practices if you are purchasing your produce from someone else. Store to prevent contamination and promote good quality. Temperature control. So after you have cut your produce, before you've started to juice that, holding that cut produce at or below 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Having that good sanitation routine of your equipment and your surfaces. employee hygiene, including not working while sick and having those proper hand washing and single-use disposable gloves, pasteurization according to the research-based procedures, and then again, that appropriate packaging and labeling. For recipes in those processes, so for those cottage food producers, you'll likely be looking at the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning and the National Center for Home Food Preservation for those juice processes and recipes. For those looking for that information on their pasteurization time and temps, looking at education institutions like extensions, process authority, and then current scientific research. So I just have a case study that Rick will share the link in the chat. And this is an example of research that you could use to help with your HACCP plan. This was for small scale juicing of Florida grown UF Sun peaches. And it's a really interesting read and should hopefully help connect the dots for you if you're new into this business. And then just a few reminders, Dream Food Safety Dream Sale. So temperature control for all the juice. Even if it's pasteurized, that doesn't mean it doesn't need cold holding. We talked about those different types of pasteurizations. You can use ice to keep that juice cold if you're selling it at a market or a community event, as long as that juice is in a container that's not permeable and it's in a perforated tray so that ice melt or that melt water can drain away. If you're making or juicing on site at the orchard or at a farmer's market, using those practices to minimize cross-contamination, using washed, good quality produce, keeping your juicing or pressing equipment free from buildup, using those proper hand washing practices, and minimizing any of those routes for contamination. Rick is going to share a link in the chat to our safe food sampling and product demonstration best practices. A lot of these practices can be applied if you are making and pressing that juice right there at a farmer's market or at an orchard or a roadside stand. And again, just that reminder, if it is that raw juice, it has to have that FDA raw juice warning. So with that, that is all the information we had. Before we open it up for questions, please take a moment sometime today to complete the evaluation survey. Your feedback is extremely important and helps guide future programming. The link will also be included in that follow-up email next week. And then inviting you next month, our topic will be canning low acid foods. So with that, thank you. And I will get the